Good morning, Anne. Thank you very much for coming into the BPIF offices in London on a very, very hot summer's day. What we're going to talk about over the next few minutes are the changes around legislation for persons of significant control. Now, I'm sure our members are going to see this as yet more red tape, but I wonder if you could just explain a little bit more to the background of this, please.
Indeed, I'm going to call them the PSC because otherwise the person with significant influence and control is just impossible to say.
Yeah.
It's come about because of the 2013 G8 summit, where it was decided that more transparency was needed in corporate governance. That was then enacted into British legislation under the Small Businesses Enterprise and Employment Act 2015.
Right.
And amongst other things, the PSC was part of that act. What it requires is that anyone who has significant influence and control over a company is registered and listed on a register.
Right, okay. And so it's more than just a list of shareholders. Who might be a PSC or a person of significant control? Explain more about that, please. Yeah.
Well, yes. There are specific definitions, some of which are more vague than others, which isn't necessarily very helpful. The straightforward ones are that anyone who has 25% shareholding in a company will be a PSC. Anyone who has the right to appoint all or most of the board will also be a PSC. Yeah. Then you get into the more amorphous area of anyone else who might have significant influence and control.
Yeah.
Now, that could be anybody, and in big companies it's going to be different to small companies. With our members, often family-owned, an individual could be the founder member of the company who doesn't have necessarily a day-to-day role anymore, but still is very influential in decisions that are made. That might well be somebody who has to be registered as a PSC.
So family chairman or a chairman of the board would be on the board and they would clearly be a person of significant control.
Yes.
But actually an ex-chairman or someone who stepped down from the board and is in the background, which is not an uncommon situation with small privately owned businesses. What about a shadow director? How would the legislation affect that sort of role?
Yeah, shadow directors are often overlooked, and in the government guidance it clearly says that shadow directors might be a PSC, and a shadow director can be anything from your bank, if they're very involved in your board decisions, through to somebody at a lower management level but sits in on the board and is instrumental in board decision making.
But they would need to have significant control.
Yes.
And independent advisors, accountants, lawyers, will they be affected here?
If they're just giving advice externally, they're not going to be PSC. So I suppose there might be a scenario where a lawyer sits on your board and influences your decisions, that they might be edging towards becoming a PSC. Okay,
well that's very useful. So that sort of clarified a little bit more about who might be affected and who might not be. And the register itself, what's that going to look like?
It's a very simple, straightforward table of people who are PSCs.
Yeah.
BPIF has a template for our members to use, and it's just name, address, date of birth, and why that person is considered a PSC.
Name, address, date of birth, some personal details there.
Indeed.
And then what are the issues around privacy here?
Well, that template must be held both at register, must be held both at the company and also registered at Companies House.
Yeah.
At Companies House, you can remove some of that information, for instance, the address of the person concerned.
Right.
If you can persuade Companies House that there's a serious risk of harm to the person, you might be able to redact even further.
And my understanding is that the filing takes place at the same time as what used to be the annual return, is that correct?
That's correct, yes. You file your PSC register along with what's now called the confirmation statement, but used to be the annual return.
Right, okay. So that's very interesting. So we've talked a little bit about who will be affected by this legislation, and you've given a real insight into what companies need to do to comply and to actually register. I guess there are always sanctions in this sort of instance. What happens if someone forgets or neglects to do this?
Well, I'm afraid that is actually a criminal offence.
Right.
And there is a fine of up to £1,000 per offence. So if you've completely failed to register, say, 10 people who should have been registered, that's a fine of £10,000. So it's worth thinking about, because it's not really that much extra work for what could be quite a bad sanction.
Well, absolutely, I wholly agree. It's been very interesting because clearly companies have to take an additional step here. There is more red tape, but it's not that major step really, and there are significant sanctions if they don't comply. Indeed. Very interesting. Thank you very much, Anne.
Not at all.